Cook spots. 6-year-old boy eating garbage. She breaks down when she hears what he says. Rachel Wilson was finishing another exhausting day when she heard noises coming from the back of the restaurant. It was almost midnight and all the staff had already left, but someone was rummaging through the trash bins in the service area. When she approached the back door, her heart nearly stopped. A small boy, no older than 6, was sitting on the dirty ground, eating scraps of food he had pulled from the garbage. His clothes were torn and he was shivering from the cold on Chicago's freezing night. "Hey, kid, what are you doing here?" Rachel called out, her voice echoing in the narrow alley. The boy startled and dropped the piece of bread he was holding. His big eyes welled up with tears as he tried to stand and run, but he stumbled and fell again. "Please, Mom, don't hurt me," he whispered, shrinking against the wall. "I wasn't stealing anything, I swear." Rachel felt something tighten in her chest. The sight was heartbreaking, but she couldn't let children dig through the restaurant's trash. It was against all hygiene rules. "You can't stay here, sweetheart. It's dangerous," she said, softening her voice. "Where are your parents?" "I don't have any," he answered, wiping his nose with his dirty sleeve. "But it's not for me, Mom. It's for my little sister. She's sick at home." The boy's words hit Rachel like a punch to the gut. She froze, staring at this frail child who was scavenging food, not for himself, but for someone even smaller. "Your little sister?" she asked, crouching to his level. "Where do you live?" "Somewhere nearby," he said, vaguely pointing in a direction. "She has a fever and can't get out of bed. I promised I'd bring her food." Rachel looked at the scraps scattered on the ground and felt a lump in her throat. How could a child so young carry such a heavy burden? "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Ethan," the boy replied, still wary. "And you won't call the cops, right, ma'am?" "I won't call anyone," Rachel promised. "Wait here just a minute, okay?" She hurried back inside the restaurant and quickly packed a generous meal: rice, beans, a large piece of grilled chicken, mashed potatoes, and even a slice of chocolate cake left over from the day's dessert. When she returned, Ethan was still pressed against the wall, shivering. Rachel handed him the container along with a bottle of water. "This is for your sister," she said. "And this one's for you," she added, giving him a smaller container. The boy's eyes widened with surprise and suspicion. "You're not going to ask for something in return?" he asked cautiously. "I don't want anything," Rachel replied, her heart aching even more. "I just want you both to have a good meal tonight." Ethan took the containers carefully, as if they were precious treasures. His small hands trembled as he held them. "Thank you, ma'am, you're real nice," he said, tears in his eyes. "My sister's going to be so happy." "Listen here, Ethan," Rachel said, placing a hand on his thin shoulder. "Come back here tomorrow night, okay? Same time. I'll leave food for both of you." "Really?" he asked, disbelieving. "Really? But promise me one thing, don't tell anyone about this, all right? It's our secret." Ethan nodded vigorously before running off, clutching the meals like rare jewels. Rachel stood in the alley, watching his small figure disappear into the dark street. That night she barely slept. She couldn't stop thinking about the boy and his sick little sister. How could 2 children so young survive alone on the streets of Chicago? The next day, Rachel arrived earlier at the restaurant. Throughout her shift, she couldn't focus properly on her work. She burned a pot of sauce and messed up the seasoning on 2 dishes, things that never happened to her. "Rachel, you seem off today," commented Jessica, one of the kitchen assistants. "Did something happen?" "Just tired," Rachel lied, nervously stirring a pot of risotto. When evening came and the restaurant closed, Rachel prepared 2 lunchboxes even more carefully than the day before. She even added a piece of cheese and some fruit she had bought with her own money. Ethan showed up right on time, punctual as an adult. He brought the lunchboxes from the previous day, clean and a folded piece of paper. "My sister sent this for you," he said, handing the paper to Rachel. She opened the note and read the words written in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for the food. May God bless you." The food was delicious. Rachel looked at the writing and something didn't add up. That wasn't a child's handwriting. It belonged to someone older, someone who had learned to write long ago. "Ethan, who wrote this?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "My sister did," he replied quickly. "She writes really well." "How old is she?" Ethan hesitated for a moment. She's 8, he finally said. But she's really smart. Rachel didn't believe his answer, but didn't want to press the boy. She handed him the new lunch boxes and repeated her promise that he could come back the next day. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. For an entire week, the ritual repeated. Ethan always showed up at the same time, brought back the clean lunch boxes, and sometimes little thank you notes. Rachel noticed the boy was gaining a bit of weight and seemed less scared, but her questions about his sister still didn't get convincing answers. By Friday, she had made a decision. When Ethan left carrying the lunch boxes, Rachel discreetly followed him, keeping enough distance to stay unseen. The boy walked several blocks, crossed an abandoned square and entered a building that looked like it had been condemned years ago. The windows were broken, there was no electricity, and the place reeked of mold and neglect. Rachel waited a few minutes before approaching the building. She climbed the creaky stairs to the 3rd floor, following the sound of voices coming from one of the apartments. Through the slightly open door, she could see Ethan sitting on the floor, sharing the food with an elderly woman lying on a pile of old blankets. The woman had messy grey hair and dirty clothes, but there was something familiar about her features. "Grandma, I brought the good food again," Ethan said affectionately. "The lady from the restaurant is really nice to me." "You have to be careful, my angel," the woman replied hoarsely. "We can't trust everyone." Rachel moved closer to the door and nearly stumbled back when she saw the woman's face. It was Eleanor Thompson, her old culinary school teacher, the woman who had mysteriously disappeared 15 years ago, leaving everyone worried. The shock was so great that Rachel staggered and bumped into the door, making a loud noise. Ethan immediately looked toward the sound and saw her. "Ma'am!" he shouted, startled. "You followed me!" Before Rachel could say anything, Ethan ran off, leaving the elderly woman alone in the apartment. Rachel stood frozen in the doorway, staring at Eleanor, who didn't seem to recognize her. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked fearfully. "What do you want with the boy?" "Professor Eleanor. It's me, Rachel." "Your student from the cooking school," said Rachel, stepping slowly into the apartment. "Don't you remember me?" Eleanor looked at her in confusion, as if trying to piece together a puzzle in her mind. "Rachel," she murmured. "That name. I know that name." "You taught me how to make that special tomato sauce," Rachel continued, moving closer. "And you always said I had a golden touch for seasoning meats." A flicker of recognition flashed in Eleanor's tired eyes, but it faded just as quickly. I don't remember," she said, bringing her hands to her head. "Sometimes things get jumbled up in here." Rachel knelt beside the teacher and noticed she had a high fever. Her clothes were dirty, and it looked like she hadn't bathed in days. "Professor, where have you been all these years?" Rachel asked softly. "Everyone was looking for you." I don't know," Eleanor replied, confused. "Sometimes I remember things, but then they disappear. Ethan found me on the street 2 years ago. He takes care of me." Rachel understood the situation. Eleanor had lost her memory for some reason and had been living as a homeless woman until Ethan found her. The boy, who must have been only 4 at the time, had taken on the role of caregiver for the elderly woman. "Where's Ethan now?" Rachel asked. "He got scared," Eleanor answered. "Whenever strangers show up, he hides. Bad things have happened to him before." Rachel spent the whole night searching for Ethan around the building but couldn't find him. She returned home worried, and the next day she arrived at the restaurant completely distracted. "Rachel, you look terrible," said the pastry chef, Andrew. "What happened?" "Personal problems," she replied without going into detail. During her shift, Rachel couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and Eleanor. How could a 6-year-old boy take care of an elderly woman with memory problems? Where did they get money for medicine? And what had happened to Ethan to make him so afraid of adults? That night, Rachel prepared the meals as usual, but Ethan didn't show up. She waited until 2 in the morning, but he never came for the food. The same thing happened on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. No sign of the boy. Rachel was growing desperate. On Tuesday, she couldn't take it anymore and went back to the abandoned building. She climbed to the third floor and found the apartment empty. There was no trace of Eleanor or Ethan, just some old blankets and empty cans scattered on the floor. Rachel went back down to the street and started asking the neighbors if they'd seen an elderly woman and a little boy. Most didn't know anything, but a woman who lived on the corner remembered seeing an ambulance at the building on Monday. "They took an old lady who was very sick," the neighbor said. "There was a little boy crying a lot. I think they took him too." Rachel's heart raced. Eleanor must have fallen ill and likely been hospitalized, but where? And what had happened to Ethan? Over the next few days, she called every hospital in the area, but none had a record of a patient named Eleanor Thompson. The problem was she probably didn't have any ID and must have given another name or couldn't even identify herself. On Thursday, Rachel was leaving the restaurant when she saw a small figure standing across the street, staring at the building. It was Ethan. She ran across, but by the time she reached the other side, the boy had vanished again. Rachel began searching the nearby streets and finally found him hiding behind a trash bin 3 blocks away. "Ethan," she called, approaching slowly. "It's me, Rachel. You don't have to be afraid." The boy looked at her with eyes red from crying. "Auntie took my grandma away," he said, sobbing. "She was really sick and a lady in a white uniform came and said she had to go to the hospital." "And you? Why didn't you go with her?" "I tried, but they wouldn't let me," Ethan replied. "They said I had to go somewhere else with other people who would take care of me, but I don't want to. I just want my grandma back." Rachel knelt to his level and hugged him. He was even thinner than before, shivering from cold and fear. "Where have you been sleeping all these days?" she asked. "Different places," Ethan answered. "Sometimes on park benches, sometimes inside closed stores, but it's so cold, and there are bad men who bother kids." Rachel felt her blood boil. A 6-year-old boy living on the streets alone, running from the very system meant to protect him. "Ethan, do you want to come with me?" she asked impulsively. "I can give you food and a warm place to sleep while we look for your grandma." Ethan eyed her suspiciously. "You won't turn me over to those people in uniforms?" "No," Rachel promised. "We'll look for your grandma together, okay?" After a long hesitation, Ethan agreed. Rachel took him to her small apartment in Wicker Park, gave him a bath and prepared a hearty meal. The boy ate as if he hadn't seen food in days, which was probably true. "Aunt Rachel," Ethan said after eating, "Grandma isn't really my grandma, you know." "What do you mean?" "I found her on the street 2 years ago," he explained. "She was lying near a dumpster, hurt and saying strange things. I had run away from the shelter because the staff did bad things to me." Rachel's chest tightened, but she didn't press him for details. Ethan continued. "So I started taking care of her. At first, she was really confused. Sometimes she didn't even know my name. But after a while, she started calling me her grandson, and I started calling her grandma." "Why did you run away from the shelter, Ethan?" The boy lowered his head and stayed quiet for a long time. "There's a man there who hurts kids when no one's looking," he finally said. "And when we tell, no one believes us. That's why I ran away." Rachel hugged him tightly, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. How could the system fail the most vulnerable children so badly? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. That night, Rachel barely slept. She kept thinking about Eleanor and how to find her. She also worried about Ethan and how to protect him without putting him back in danger. The next day, Rachel called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. She spent the whole day visiting hospitals with Ethan, showing an old photo of Eleanor she had found in her culinary school files. At the 4th hospital they visited, a nurse recognized Eleanor in the photo. "Yes, she's here," the nurse said. "She was admitted on Monday with severe pneumonia. She was very weak and had no ID. She's delirious most of the time, but she has moments of clarity." "Can I see her?" Rachel asked. "And the boy? Is he related to her?" Rachel hesitated. If she told the truth, they'd likely separate Ethan from Eleanor again. "He's her grandson," she lied. "They got separated in the confusion when she was admitted. The nurse led them to the room where Eleanor was staying. She looked even frailer in the hospital bed, with tubes and machines connected to her. "Grandma!" Ethan cried, running to the bed. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes and a faint smile crossed her face when she saw the boy. "Ethan, my angel," she whispered. "I was so afraid something had happened to you." "I'm okay, Grandma." "Aunt Rachel is taking care of me," said Ethan, holding Eleanor's hand. Eleanor looked at Rachel, and for a moment her eyes grew more focused. "Rachel, I know you," she said slowly. "You were my most dedicated student, always eager to learn everything about spices and sauces." "Yes, Professor, it's really me," Rachel replied, moved to see that Eleanor had recognized her. "What happened to me, Rachel?" Eleanor asked, confused. "Sometimes I remember things, but other times everything gets so jumbled in my head." "Don't worry about that now," Rachel said. "The important thing is that you get better." In the days that followed, Rachel established a routine. She worked at the restaurant during the day, brought Ethan with her whenever possible, and in the evenings they visited Eleanor at the hospital. The doctor explained that Eleanor had suffered a head injury years ago, which caused memory problems and episodes of mental confusion. With proper treatment and care, she could regain some of her cognitive function. "She'll need a lot of support when she's discharged," the doctor explained. "Is there a family member who can take on this responsibility?" Rachel looked at Ethan, who was holding Eleanor's hand tightly. "Yes," she answered. "I can take care of her." But Rachel knew her life was about to get much more complicated. She barely earned enough to support herself in her small apartment. How could she afford to care for an elderly woman who needed expensive medication and a child who should be in school? On top of that, at the restaurant, her boss, Richard Miller, had noticed her absences and early departures. "Rachel, I need to talk to you," he said one Friday after closing. "Yes, Mr. Richard?" "You've been distracted lately. You were late 3 times this week, and yesterday you didn't even show up. What's going on?" Rachel thought about telling him the truth, but she knew Richard was a businessman above all else. He had inherited the restaurant from his father 2 years ago, and since then, all he cared about was profit. "I've had some personal issues, but they're being taken care of," she replied. "I hope so," Richard said coldly, "because I can't let the quality of service drop because of employees' personal problems. If this continues, I'll have to take more drastic measures." Rachel knew exactly what he meant. Over the past 2 years, Richard had fired several long-time employees and hired younger, cheaper replacements. She was one of the few who had survived, only because she was truly good at her job. That evening, as Rachel was packing meals to take to the hospital, she noticed that some expensive ingredients were missing from the pantry. Shrimp, salmon, shiitake mushrooms, things she would never use in meals for Eleanor and Ethan. On Saturday, Richard arrived at the restaurant early and called Rachel aside for a private talk. "Rachel, food is missing from the stock," he said bluntly. "About $200 worth of ingredients disappeared this week." "I don't know how that could have happened," Rachel lied, feeling cold sweat trickle down her back. "I'm installing security cameras in the kitchen," Richard announced. "If I find out someone's stealing food, they'll be fired immediately and charged criminally." Rachel spent the weekend in distress. She had taken some ingredients to prepare more nutritious meals for Eleanor, who was recovering from pneumonia. But technically, it was theft, even if it was for a good cause. By Monday, the cameras were already in place. Rachel felt watched all the time and could barely focus on her work. That night, when she went to visit Eleanor at the hospital, the professor was more lucid than usual. "Rachel, I need to tell you something," Eleanor said, holding her hand. "I'm starting to remember some things." "What do you remember?" "I remember the restaurant," said Eleanor, her eyes shining. "The restaurant that was mine, where I taught cooking to young people like you." Rachel was surprised. She had always thought Eleanor just taught at a cooking school, not that she owned a restaurant. "Royal Flavors," Eleanor continued. "It was my restaurant. I worked my whole life to build it. I held cooking classes in the morning and served special dinners at night." "What happened to the restaurant, Mom?" Eleanor's face twisted with pain and confusion. "There's a man, a bad man," she said, agitated. "He wanted to take everything from me." Said I was getting too old and couldn't run the business anymore. Easy, Mom, Rachel said, seeing Eleanor getting upset. Don't force your memory. No, I need to remember, Eleanor insisted. He made me sign papers. Said it was just to organize the finances, but then he said the restaurant was his now. Rachel felt a chill down her spine. Eleanor's story was starting to make sense in a disturbing way. What did this man look like, Mom? Tall, dark hair, always wore expensive suits, Eleanor described. He claimed to be my partner, but I never agreed to have partners. The restaurant was mine alone. Do you remember his name? Eleanor concentrated for a few minutes, but then shook her head. I can't remember the name, she said, frustrated, but I remember he had a son, an arrogant boy who always bragged about inheriting everything from his father. Rachel began piecing the puzzle together. The restaurant where she worked was called Royal Flavors, and Richard had inherited the business from his father 2 years ago, right around the time Eleanor disappeared. Mom, do you remember having an accident? Maybe hitting your head? Eleanor instinctively touched her forehead and winced in pain. I remember falling, she said slowly. I was leaving the restaurant late at night. I'd argued with that man earlier that day. He was furious because I said I'd get a lawyer to review the contracts. And after the fall? I only remember being on the street, not knowing where I was or who I was, Eleanor said, tears in her eyes. Until Ethan found me. Rachel felt a deep anger rising in her chest. Richard and his father had stolen Eleanor's restaurant and were likely responsible for the accident that left her with memory problems. Mom, do you have any documents proving the restaurant was yours? I don't know, Eleanor replied. I don't remember where I kept my papers, but there was a safe in my house. Do you think it's still there? Where was your house? Eleanor managed to recall the address, a townhouse in Lincoln Park. Rachel decided she'd go there the next day to investigate. On Tuesday, Rachel lied to Richard, saying she was sick and couldn't work. She picked up Ethan from school. She'd managed to enroll him in a school near her apartment, and they went together to the address Eleanor had given. The house was still there, but it was locked up with a for sale sign out front. Rachel called the real estate agency and learned the property belonged to a man named Robert Miller. The name made Rachel choke. Robert Miller was Richard's father, the former owner of the restaurant. Can I see the house? Rachel asked the agent. I'm interested in buying. Of course, the woman replied. I can show it this afternoon if you'd like. Rachel left Ethan with a trusted neighbor and met the agent at Eleanor's house. The townhouse had been empty for years, with furniture covered in sheets and a strong smell of mildew. The previous owner passed away a few years ago, the agent explained. It was an elderly woman who mysteriously disappeared. The heirs want to sell quickly to avoid paying property taxes. Heirs? Asked Rachel. Yes, a businessman in the restaurant industry. It seems the woman had sold the house to him shortly before disappearing. Rachel asked to see the house's office. There she found an old desk with locked drawers. The realtor said she didn't have the keys, but Rachel insisted on seeing everything before making a purchase decision. While the realtor went to fetch the keys with the building's caretaker, Rachel discreetly forced open one of the drawers. Inside was a folder with several documents, the house's deeds, restaurant contracts, and other important papers. Rachel quickly took the most crucial documents and hid them in her bag before the realtor returned. That night, Rachel carefully examined the papers. Everything was there. Eleanor Thompson was indeed the owner of the restaurant Royal Flavors. There was also a partnership contract with Robert Miller, but it was dated just 3 days before Eleanor disappeared. Eleanor's signature on the contract looked forced and unlike her other signatures on older documents. Additionally, there was a letter Eleanor had apparently been writing to a lawyer, stating that Robert was pressuring her to sell the restaurant and that she suspected he was forging documents. Rachel now had proof that Eleanor was the true owner of the restaurant and that Robert had used questionable methods to take over the business. But what should she do with this information? If she confronted Richard directly, he could destroy the evidence and get rid of her. Besides, Eleanor still had memory issues, and Ethan was just a child. It would be their word against that of an established businessman. Rachel decided to seek help from Michael Johnson, the former sous chef of the restaurant who had been fired by Richard the previous year. Michael had always been loyal to Eleanor and might have valuable information. She found him working at a small diner downtown. When he saw Rachel, his face lit up. "Rachel, it's so good to see you," he said, giving her a warm hug. "How are you? Still putting up with Richard at that restaurant?" "Michael, I need to talk to you about something very serious," Rachel said. "It's about Mrs. Thompson." Michael's expression turned serious immediately. "Do you have news about her?" he asked anxiously. "I never stopped wondering what happened. She just vanished out of nowhere." "I found her," Rachel said. "She's alive, but she's been through a lot." Rachel told Michael the whole story, how she found Ethan, how she discovered Eleanor, her memory problems, and the suspicions about Robert and Richard. "I always knew something was off about that story," Michael said, shaking his head. "Robert showed up out of nowhere claiming to be Mrs. Thompson's partner, but she had never mentioned any partner before." "Do you remember anything else strange?" "I do," Michael replied. "In the last week before Mrs. Thompson disappeared, Robert was always there, pressuring her to sign papers. She seemed very stressed and even asked me if I knew any trustworthy lawyers." "And did you recommend anyone?" "I suggested Mr. David Brooks, a lawyer who helped my family with some inheritance matters, but I don't know if she ever reached out to him." Rachel wrote down the lawyer's name. Perhaps he could help them better understand the legal situation and find a way to prove Eleanor was the true owner of the restaurant. "Michael, would you be willing to testify on Mrs. Thompson's behalf if needed?" "Of course," he answered without hesitation. "She was always like a mother to me. She taught me everything I know about cooking and always treated me with great affection and respect." Rachel left the meeting with Michael feeling more confident. She wasn't alone in this fight. There were people who cared about Eleanor and were willing to help. The next day, Rachel called Dr. David Brooks and scheduled an appointment. She brought all the documents she had found at Eleanor's house and told the lawyer the whole story. "It's a complex case," said Dr. David after reviewing the papers, "but you have a good chance of getting the restaurant back. These documents clearly show there was fraud in the property transfer. How long could this take?" "It depends on several factors," explained the lawyer. "If Robert and Richard cooperate, it could be resolved in a few months, but if they decide to fight, it could take years." "And how much will it cost?" Dr. David hesitated before answering. "My fee is $15,000 plus court costs," he said. "I know it's a lot of money, but this case will require a lot of work and investigation." Rachel felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. $15,000 was more than she made in an entire year. How could she afford a lawyer? "Is there any way to do this without paying up front?" she asked desperately. "I can work on contingency," said Dr. David. "If we win the case, my fees would be paid from part of the recovered amount. But if we lose, you'd only have to cover the court costs." It was risky, but it was the only option Rachel had. She agreed to the terms, and Dr. David began preparing the lawsuit. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, things were getting increasingly tense. The security cameras had caught Rachel taking some ingredients home, and Richard called her in for a talk the following Monday. "Rachel, I saw the security footage," he said coldly. "You have two choices. Pay me for the ingredients you stole, or you're fired for cause." "Richard, I can explain," Rachel began. "I don't want explanations," he interrupted. "I want $300 on my desk by Friday, or you're out." Rachel knew she didn't have $300 to spare. All her money was going toward caring for Ethan and Eleanor, who had been discharged from the hospital and was now living in her apartment. By Thursday, Rachel still hadn't gotten the money. She had tried borrowing from friends, but no one had that amount available. On Friday morning, Richard called her into his office. "Where's my money, Rachel?" "I couldn't gather it all yet," she admitted, "but I can pay in installments if you'll accept that." "I won't," Richard said flatly. "You're fired. Collect your things and leave." Rachel felt her world collapse. Without a job, how would she pay rent, buy food and medicine for Eleanor, and keep Ethan in school? She left the restaurant carrying a box of her personal belongings, feeling utterly defeated. She had fought so hard to help Eleanor and Ethan, and now they were all in an even worse situation. When she got home, she found Eleanor sitting in the living room, looking out the window. The teacher was having one of her good days, her mind clearer. "Rachel, you're home early," Eleanor observed. Did something happen at work? Rachel couldn't hide the truth. She told Eleanor about the firing and the financial struggles they were facing. "My dear," Eleanor said, taking Rachel's hand, "you've done so much for me and Ethan. I can't let you suffer because of us." "It's not your fault, Professor. I chose to help you." "I know, but now it's my turn to do something," Eleanor said firmly. "I need to get my restaurant back." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. That weekend, Eleanor had several clear memory episodes and managed to recall many important details about what had happened in the days leading up to her disappearance. "Rachel, now I remember," she said on Sunday morning. "Robert wasn't just greedy. He found out I was investigating some of his shady dealings." "What kind of dealings?" "He owned other restaurants around the city and was involved in tax evasion and illegal labor practices," Eleanor explained. "I stumbled upon it by accident when I saw some documents he left on my desk." "Did you tell anyone about this?" "I spoke to Dr. David," Eleanor said. "I had scheduled a meeting with him for the week after my disappearance. I was going to bring all the evidence and report Robert to the proper authorities." Rachel realized the situation was even more serious than she'd thought. Robert hadn't just stolen Eleanor's restaurant, he'd tried to silence her to protect his illegal schemes. "Professor, do you remember where you kept those documents about Robert's business dealings?" "They were in the safe at my house," Eleanor replied, "along with the restaurant paperwork." Rachel remembered she still hadn't managed to open the safe at Eleanor's house. On Monday, she called the real estate agency and said she wanted a second visit to make her final decision about buying the place. This time, she brought Ethan along. While the agent took a call outside, Rachel and Ethan located the safe behind a painting in the office. "Aunt Rachel, I know how to open these things," Ethan said unexpectedly. "What do you mean?" "At the shelter, one of the older boys taught me," he explained. "He said knowing how to pick locks could come in handy." Rachel was torn between the need to retrieve the documents and her concern about what Ethan had learned on the streets, but the situation was desperate. Ethan opened the safe in just a few minutes. Inside was a treasure trove of documents, contracts, receipts, photos, cassette recordings, and even flash drives with digital files. Rachel quickly took everything and hid it in her bag before the agent returned. They left the house with a wealth of evidence that could completely turn the tide. That evening, Rachel, Eleanor, and Dr. David met at the lawyer's office to review the material. What they found was shocking. Robert Miller hadn't just stolen Eleanor's restaurant. He ran a network of businesses exploiting illegal labor, evading taxes, and laundering money from illicit activities. "With this evidence, we can not only reclaim the restaurant," Dr. David said. "We can report his entire operation to the IRS and the district attorney's office." "But won't that be dangerous?" Rachel asked, worried. "If Robert finds out we have this information." "That's why we'll act quickly," the lawyer replied. "I'll file all the paperwork tomorrow. Once these documents are officially submitted to the court, it'll be very hard for him to do anything against you." On Tuesday morning, Dr. David filed 3 separate actions. One to reclaim the restaurant, another to nullify the fraudulent contracts, and a third to report Robert's crimes to the proper authorities. That same day, court officers went to Royal Flavors to notify Richard about the legal actions. Rachel wasn't there, but Michael, who still kept in touch with some employees, told her Richard became extremely agitated and immediately called several lawyers. "He's desperate," said Michael. "It seems he didn't expect anyone to question his father's inheritance." In the following days, the situation escalated quickly. The Internal Revenue Service opened an investigation into Robert's businesses. The district attorney's office began reviewing allegations of financial crimes, and the judge issued an injunction preventing Richard from selling or transferring the restaurant until the case was resolved. Richard tried contacting Rachel multiple times, but she followed Mr. David's advice and didn't answer any calls. All communication had to go through the lawyer. On Thursday, Rachel received an unexpected call. It was Jessica, her former co-worker from the restaurant. "Rachel, you need to know something," Jessica said nervously. "Richard hired a private investigator to look into you, and there's more. He found out about the boy and the elderly woman you're taking care of." Rachel felt a chill down her spine. If Richard discovered Ethan was a runaway from the system, he could use it against them. Did he say anything specific? He said he'd prove you're unstable and unfit to care for a sick elderly woman, Jessica explained, and that he'd called Child Protective Services to take the boy away from you. Rachel hung up with trembling hands. She needed to act fast to protect Ethan. That night she talked to Eleanor about the situation. "Professor, maybe it's best if I hand Ethan over to a real adoptive family," Rachel said, tears in her eyes. "That way, he'd be safe and have a better life." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Ethan is our boy now. We won't abandon him at the first sign of trouble." "But you see how complicated this is. Richard could use Ethan against us in the case." Eleanor grew thoughtful for a few minutes. "Rachel, I need to tell you something else I remembered," she said. "Robert had a weakness. He was being blackmailed by someone." "Blackmailed?" "Yes. I overheard some phone conversations where he seemed pressured for money. Someone had compromising information on him and was demanding silence. Do you know who it was? I'm not sure, but I think it was someone connected to his illegal dealings. Maybe a former partner or employee who knew too much." Rachel realized this information could be useful. If they could identify who was blackmailing Robert, they might uncover more evidence against him. The next day, Rachel decided to visit some of the other restaurants that belonged to Robert's chain. She wanted to talk to current and former employees to gather more information. At the third restaurant she visited, a small pizzeria on the east side, Rachel met Margaret, a woman in her 60s who had worked as manager for over 10 years. "Did you know Mr. Robert personally?" Rachel asked, posing as an investigative journalist. "I did. God rest his soul," Margaret replied, crossing herself. "He wasn't an easy man to deal with, but at least he paid on time. Do you know if he had any issues with former employees or partners?" Margaret glanced around nervously before answering. "Look, I don't like speaking ill of the dead, but Mr. Robert had some shady dealings," she said, lowering her voice. "There was a man who came here sometimes, always nervous, always demanding money from him. Do you remember what he looked like?" "Thin guy, around 50, always wore a cap and sunglasses. Mr. Robert would get really stressed when he showed up." "Does he still come around?" "No, he stopped after Mr. Robert passed, but I once saw him talking to Mr. Robert's son, Richard. It seemed like he was demanding the same thing from him." Rachel felt she was on the right track. This mysterious man might have valuable information about Robert and Richard's business dealings. "Would you happen to know where I could find this man? I don't know where he lives, but I know he frequents a bar in Wicker Park, Joe's Bar. That's where he does some accounting side jobs for small business owners." Rachel knew Joe's Bar. It was just 3 blocks from her apartment. That night, after dropping Ethan and Eleanor off at home, she went to the bar to try and find the mysterious man. The bar was crowded, as usual on Fridays. Rachel sat at the counter and ordered a beer, discreetly observing the patrons. After an hour, she was about to give up when she saw a thin man in a cap and sunglasses enter the establishment. He sat at a table in the back and ordered a whiskey. Rachel waited a few minutes and approached. "Excuse me, are you an accountant?" she asked, feigning casualness. The man eyed her suspiciously. "Depends who's asking," he replied. "I need help with some tax issues for my business. Mrs. Margaret, from Mr. Robert's Pizzeria, said you were very good at these things." Hearing Robert's name, the man visibly tensed. "I don't work on anything related to Robert anymore," he said quickly. "And I suggest you steer clear of anything tied to that family." "Why? Did something happen?" The man downed his whiskey in one gulp and stood to leave. "Miss, if you're smart, forget anything to do with the Millers," he said. "That family's days are numbered." Before Rachel could ask anything else, the man hurried out of the bar. But she had gained an important clue. Someone had enough evidence to threaten the entire Miller family. On Saturday morning, Rachel told David about the encounter at the bar. "You need to find out who this man is," the lawyer said. "If he has damning information about Robert and Richard, he could be a key ally for our case." "How can I find him?" "Go back to the bar for a few nights in a row. People with regular habits usually show up at the same places around the same time." Rachel took his advice. For an entire week, she went to Joe's Bar every night. On Thursday, the man appeared again. This time, Rachel tried a different approach. Instead of confronting him directly, she watched his movements. When he left the bar, she discreetly followed him. The man walked several blocks until he reached a small accounting office in a commercial building. The sign on the door read, Public Accountant Gerald Parker, CPA 12345. Now Rachel knew his name, Gerald Parker. The next day, she returned to the office during business hours. "Mr. Gerald?" she said as she stepped inside. "You're the woman from the bar," he said immediately. "What do you want from me?" "I'd like to propose a deal," Rachel said bluntly. "I know you have information about Robert Miller. I have information about him too. Maybe we can help each other." Gerald looked at her with interest for the first time. "What kind of information do you have?" "Documents proving fraud, tax evasion, illegal labor practices," Rachel listed. "And you?" Gerald hesitated for a moment, then locked the office door. "I was Robert's accountant for 15 years, he said. "I knew all his schemes. When I tried to walk away, he threatened me." "How so?" "He said if I ever talked to the authorities, he'd make sure I went down as an accomplice," Gerald explained. "So I started charging for silence. It wasn't blackmail, it was protection. And now that Robert's dead." "Richard took his father's place," Gerald said bitterly. "Keep paying me to keep my mouth shut. But I'm tired of this life. I want out of this situation." Rachel realized she had found a powerful ally. "Mr. Parker, we're filing lawsuits against Richard," she explained. "We have proof that Robert stole a restaurant from an elderly woman. If you testify for her, we can bring down the entire Miller crime organization. And I won't go to jail? With your cooperation, the district attorney's office can offer immunity in exchange for your information," Rachel said. "Mr. Brooks, our lawyer, can negotiate this." Gerald fell silent for several minutes, clearly weighing the pros and cons. "All right," he finally said. "I'm tired of living in fear. I'll cooperate with you." The following Monday, Gerald met with Rachel, Eleanor, and Mr. Brooks. He brought a briefcase full of documents, spreadsheets, recordings, and flash drives containing evidence of 15 years of financial crimes by the Miller family. "With this material, we can not only recover the restaurant," said Mr. Brooks, visibly moved. "We can dismantle the entire criminal network and ensure Richard goes to prison." "How long will this take?" Rachel asked. "With this evidence, very little time," the lawyer replied. "I'll file everything today. I expect a court decision within 2 weeks." But their plans were overtaken by events. On Tuesday morning, Rachel received a frantic call from Jessica. "Rachel, the IRS and the FBI are at the restaurant," Jessica gasped. "They came with search and seizure warrants. Richard's been arrested." Rachel could hardly believe it. Things were moving much faster than she had anticipated. "What now? What happens to the restaurant?" "It's all sealed up," Jessica said. "No one can enter until the court decides what to do." Rachel rushed to share the news with Eleanor and Ethan. The teacher was having a particularly good day and understood the situation perfectly. "So we did it, my dear," Eleanor said, hugging Rachel. "We got my restaurant back." "Not yet, Professor," Rachel cautioned. "We still need to wait for the judge's final decision." But Ethan was worried about something else. "Aunt Rachel, now that the bad man is in jail, can I keep living with you?" he asked, his eyes shining with hope. Rachel looked at Eleanor, who smiled and nodded. "Of course you can, sweetheart," Eleanor said. "You're our boy now." 2 weeks later, just as Mr. Brooks had predicted, the court ruling came. The judge ordered that Royal Flavors be fully returned to Eleanor Thompson, recognizing that the partnership contracts with Robert Miller had been obtained through fraud and coercion. Additionally, Richard was convicted of receiving stolen property, running a criminal organization, and multiple financial crimes. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Eleanor, Rachel, and Ethan went to the restaurant the day the seals were removed. The place looked exactly as Eleanor remembered, just a little dirtier and disorganized. "It's just like I remember," Eleanor said emotionally, walking through the kitchen where she had spent so many years of her life. "My home is back." Rachel looked around, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. Now they had the restaurant back, but how would they make it work again? Eleanor still had memory issues. Rachel herself had no management experience, and Ethan was just a child. "Professor, do you think we can get this place running again?" Rachel asked. "I'm sure we can," Eleanor replied, taking her hand. "With you by my side, I can do anything." In the following months, Rachel, Eleanor, and Ethan worked tirelessly to reopen the restaurant. Rachel took on the role of head chef. Eleanor taught cooking classes in the mornings, on days when she felt well, and Ethan helped with simple tasks after school. Michael returned to work as sous chef, and several other former employees came back when they heard the establishment was under new management. Rachel had the idea to turn part of the restaurant into a community space. Twice a week, they served free meals to children in vulnerable situations. "I don't want any child to go through what I went through," said Ethan, who was now 7 years old and helped serve meals to other boys and girls in difficult circumstances. Eleanor, with proper medical treatment and a stable family environment, regained much of her memory and cognitive abilities. She resumed teaching cooking classes and even wrote a recipe book, sharing her story of resilience. "Rachel," Eleanor said one Sunday afternoon as they prepared dinner together, "you know you're like a daughter to me, don't you? And you're like the mother I never had," Rachel replied, hugging her former teacher. Ethan, sitting on a high stool by the stove watching the two women cook, grinned widely. "And I'm your son," he said cheerfully. "We're a real family now." Rachel looked at the two people who had completely transformed her life. 2 years ago, she was just a lonely cook, working a job that didn't value her. Now, she was part of a family bound by love, not blood. Royal Flavors once again became one of Chicago's finest culinary establishments. But more than that, it became a symbol of hope for the community. People from all over the city came not just to eat, but to hear the inspiring story of Eleanor, Rachel, and Ethan. "See," Eleanor said to Rachel one night after closing the restaurant, "sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the hardest moments." Rachel nodded, remembering how it had all started with a little boy scavenging food from the trash. Now that same boy helped feed other children with dignity and love. "Teacher," Rachel said, "do you think all this happened by chance?" "There's no such thing as chance, my dear," Eleanor replied wisely. "There's destiny, and our destiny was to find each other and build this beautiful family." Ethan, who was arranging chairs in the dining area, overheard the conversation and ran to hug both women. "I love you," he said simply. "And we love you too, sweetheart," they replied in unison. Outside the restaurant, Chicago remained a big and sometimes harsh city. But inside Royal Flavors, there was a small corner of the world where love, justice, and hope had triumphed over cruelty and selfishness. Rachel looked out the window and saw other children walking by. Some seemed well cared for, others less so. She made a silent promise to keep helping as many children as possible. "Tomorrow, we'll prepare 100 meals to distribute in the square," she told Eleanor and Ethan. "Good idea," Eleanor agreed. "What if we invite some of those children to learn cooking here at the restaurant?" "Can I help teach?" Ethan asked excitedly. "Of course you can," Rachel said. "You'll be the best assistant teacher in the world." That night, the three of them slept in the apartment above the restaurant, which Eleanor had recovered along with the business. It was small, but cozy, and for the first time in many years, they all felt truly at home. The story of Rachel, Eleanor, and Ethan spread across the city and then the entire country. Journalists came to interview the family that had formed in such an unusual way. TV producers wanted to turn their story into a movie, but they turned down almost all offers. They didn't want fame or money. They just wanted to keep living their simple life, helping others and being happy together. "Our story isn't about money or fame," Rachel explained to a persistent journalist. "It's about love, family, and second chances." And so the restaurant Royal Flavors became more than just a business. It turned into a community center where those in need could find a hot meal, abandoned children could find affection, and everyone could find hope. Eleanor, now 65 with her memory almost fully restored, continued teaching cooking to underprivileged youth. Rachel, at 35, had become a respected chef and a devoted mother to Ethan. And Ethan, at 8 years old, already dreamed of becoming a chef when he grew up so he could feed people in need. "You know what I love most about our story?" Ethan said one afternoon as he helped Rachel prepare the special tomato sauce Eleanor had taught her years ago. "What, sweetheart?" "That it doesn't have an ending," he replied, smiling. "Every day, we keep writing our story." Rachel smiled and kissed the boy's forehead. He was right. Their story wasn't about a happy ending. It was about a happy beginning that continued every day. At the end of that year, Royal Flavors received an award from the Chicago city government as the most compassionate establishment in the city. Eleanor, Rachel, and Ethan stepped onto the stage together to accept the honor. "This award isn't ours," Eleanor said into the microphone. "It belongs to every child who once felt abandoned and found a new family, to everyone who believed in fresh starts, and to all who choose love over hate, every single day." The audience rose in applause. Rachel held tightly to Ethan's and Eleanor's hands. In that moment, she remembered the day she had found that little boy scavenging for food in the trash. Who could have imagined that meeting would change so many lives? "Aunt Rachel," Ethan whispered in her ear, "now we can help even more kids, right?" "Yes, my love," she replied. "Now we can help every child who needs it." And that's exactly what they did. The award brought visibility to the restaurant's social work, and soon they received donations and partnerships that allowed them to expand the project. A year later, there were 5 Royal Flavors outposts across the city, all serving free meals to underprivileged children and offering cooking classes to at-risk youth. Eleanor, now fully recovered, traveled between the outposts, teaching her special recipes. Rachel managed the main restaurant and coordinated the entire social project. Ethan, now 9, had become something of a mascot for the initiative, appearing in fundraising campaigns. "Can you believe it all started with a boy eating from the trash?" Michael said during a team meeting. "That's why we should never give up on people," Rachel replied. "We never know what beautiful stories might be hidden behind hard times." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "Life has taught me there are no coincidences," she said. "Ethan found me exactly when I needed to be found. Rachel found us exactly when we needed help, and we found each other exactly when we needed a family." Ethan, who had been playing with some toys in the corner of the room, lifted his head when he heard his name. "Grandma Eleanor, Aunt Rachel always says that family isn't who you're born with, but who you choose to stay with," he said. "And she's right, my dear," Eleanor replied. "You two are the best family I could have chosen." Rachel felt her eyes fill with tears. Even after 4 years since it all began, she still got emotional thinking about how their lives had transformed. That night, after closing the restaurant, the 3 went up to the apartment and sat in the living room to talk, as they did every evening. "Mom Rachel," said Ethan. He had started calling her Mom the year before. "Today at school, the teacher asked us to write about our family. Can I read what I wrote?" "Of course, sweetheart." Ethan took out a notebook page and began reading. "My family is different from everyone else's. My mum Rachel didn't carry me in her belly, but she carried me in her heart. My grandma Eleanor isn't my mum's mother, but she cares for her like her own daughter. And I'm not related by blood to either of them, but I'm their son through love. We found each other when we all needed a family. I was on the streets, alone and hungry. Grandma Eleanor was sick and confused. Mom Rachel was alone, with no children or parents. But when we came together, we became the happiest family in the world. Now we have a restaurant where we make delicious food for everyone, and we also help other kids going through what I went through. Mom Rachel always says our family grew to include all the children we help. I love my different family. And when I grow up, I want a family just like mine, made of love, not blood." When Ethan finished reading, both Rachel and Eleanor were crying. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life," Rachel said, hugging the boy. "You're such a wise boy," Eleanor added, "and you'll grow into a wonderful man." "And you two are the best mom and grandma in the world," Ethan replied. That night, before bed, Rachel stood by the apartment window looking out at the city. Chicago remained an impersonal, sometimes cruel metropolis, but she now knew there was so much love scattered throughout it. You just had to be brave enough to look and to offer it. She thought of all the children they had helped over the years. Some had found adoptive families, others had reunited with distant relatives, and a few had decided to form their own heart families like theirs. They all had one thing in common. They had discovered they didn't have to be alone in the world, that there was always someone willing to reach out, as long as they had the courage to accept help. Ethan appeared beside her at the window, in his pajamas with messy hair. "Mom, Rachel, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how beautiful our story is," she answered, "and how it'll be even more beautiful from now on." "It will," Ethan agreed. "Tomorrow we'll help more kids, right?" "We will, my love, and the day after too, and every day of our lives." Eleanor walked into the room, also in her nightgown. "Can't you two sleep?" she asked, smiling. "We were talking about the future," Rachel said. "The future is uncertain," Eleanor said, joining them at the window. "But one thing I know, we'll always be together no matter what." "Always," Rachel and Ethan said in unison. And so, the three of them stood at the window, looking out at the city that had brought them together in such a special way. Down below, other stories were beginning. Other children were struggling. Other adults were feeling alone. But at Royal Flavors, there was light, warmth, and enough love to welcome anyone in need. And Rachel, Eleanor, and Ethan knew their mission was only just beginning. The story that had begun with a boy scavenging food from the trash had become the story of hundreds of children who found hope, dignity, and love. And the most beautiful part is that it would keep multiplying day after day, meal after meal, hug after hug. Because true love has that special quality. The more you share it, the more it grows. And the family of the heart that Rachel, Eleanor, and Ethan had formed was living proof that the strongest bonds aren't those of blood, but the ones we choose to build with care, dedication, and lots of love. End of story. Now, tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a heartfelt comment below. Do you believe Rachel made the right choice by helping Ethan and Eleanor? We'd love to hear your thoughts, and thank you so much for joining us.